Let's go to this now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has thanked the media for the role it played in covering the 2021 municipal polls. This in his remarks following the announcement of the election results. Now let's reflect and unpack how our colleagues handled this period with Media Monitoring Africa's Nomshado Lubisi. Thank you so much for joining us again, Nomshado. Let's talk about the fairness of coverage. Have we seen fair media representation of political parties and candidates in this year's municipal elections compared to previous elections?
I mean, when you're talking about fairness overall, definitely in terms of fairness, the media really did come up to the front. However, there are consistent gaps that we have been, witnessing and noticing as we are monitoring these elections. And just to name one of them is, citizen voices being at the least in terms of who are we hearing the most. So your political parties, your manifestos, the messaging that they are bringing forward, those were really the top topics and obviously the top voices that we were hearing. But what was alarming was that when you're looking at a local government election, you would expect that the electorate and their issues and, their voices that really have the most impact in us understanding what are the issues that they're going, through in their own communities or their societies. And we saw that they were ranging at around 6% in terms of citizen voices. The other gap was, women. And I think this has been not only local, but a global trend where men voices are dominant. And I think they were accessed about more than 80%. And that, looks at the disproportion when we're saying between male and female representation, which has, as I said, been consistent and quite alarming as well.
Now, let's talk about the youth representation there.
So in terms of youth dynamics, I mean, we have been seeing a few voices coming forward, but we have been seeing consistently the same, voices in the forefront, especially when we're talking parties, especially when we're talking who is being accessed. So in terms of youth voices and really looking at that dimension, it has been the same consistency because I'm not even going to go lesser than that, looking at children's voices. So yes, they're not allowed to necessarily obviously vote given that their age might not allow them, but it doesn't mean that the issues have stopped. It doesn't mean that they don't have voices also to, to add on to those issues that they're being promised by political parties as well. So that as well is something that is also lacking in terms of voices being heard.
So the last time we spoke on the show, we tackled the issue of, disinformation and the spreading of fake news in the lead up to the municipal elections, also during the elections, and also the joint effort by you and the IEC and the different social media platforms you mentioned in combating the spreading of fake news. Now, what are some of the major issues and trends you picked up this time around?
So the trends that we've picked up, for the last week, obviously leading up to the elections, that's where a lot of logistics are coming, to the front. And we saw a lot of disinformation going around, technicalities such as, I think, obviously, you were asked to please bring your own pen. And we saw a lot of people taking that narrative and twisting it and actually saying, if you don't bring your pen, you won't be able to vote. Different disinformation around, different stations. So really, when you're coming to the day itself, you've got a lot of disinformation that are based on the logistics and the, what's happening at that current moment in the different stations that's going around. That can obviously also hinder people from actually, saying, okay, I can go ahead and go vote. Prior to that, it was mainly around, people using, digital banners to voice their opinions. But obviously now they're manipulating the digital posters that we've been seeing being created by the various different political parties. And obviously in that on its own, it's not disinformation per se, because this is an individual's voicing their own opinion. But in real life sense, smearing obviously is an offense on its own. And so we've been seeing those different, dilemmas coming to the front in terms of complaints that were brought forward.
So we always talk about the media's role and where we can do better, and we always want to look at where we can do better. But also when you specifically talk about women representation and youth and children, is it also not, the political parties is it not up to them as well to make sure that women voices are being heard?
Oh, definitely. I think that's a well-rounded, responsibility because, looking at it from a media perspective, they play an essential role when we're talking about democracy. But during an election period, their role is even more greater. And one of those responsibilities is ensuring that during the election period, not only do they report on candidates and what they have been saying and unpacking those issues, but it's also to be able to assist the electorate to make informed decisions on who to vote for. Also, obviously, being expected to interrogate these elections manifestos, for instance, so that the electorate can understand what is being promised to them. So there are definitely, roles that need to be fulfilled even greater during an election period. But when we're talking about voices, I believe this is something that, globally we've been struggling to ensure that we are, evening out those gender dynamics. We're bringing more female voices to the front. And you might find that in some, obviously in political parties, there are female leaders that are also part of the structure, but they're not accessed. They're not put to the front as options, as, sources that could be, spoken to as well. So yes, definitely, I think it's something that needs to be addressed from both sides as well. But I think also the media can push for those voices to also be heard.